It's there. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you today about this class activity that I have been doing with my students at Columbia University. And also before, when I was still teaching in Brazil at the University of São Paulo, I used a mock debate to teach the students how difficult it is to talk about science, especially when you pick controversial themes or themes that are seen as controversial by the general public. So I wanted them to get a feel of what it feels like when you're standing up for science against someone who is opposing scientific information, even when you have all the data and all the facts and all the evidence. And well, they did get a taste of it, and this is what I'm going to talk to you about. So the whole goal of the activity was to really get the students to analyze the debate. At least of this debate that you're going to see. So when I first started doing the mock debate, I would just divide the students into groups. So I had the science group and the anti-science group, and they had to pick a topic or of a list of topics that were like controversial scientific topics like climate change or alternative medicine or genetically modified food, and they would pick a topic, and then one group would speak up for science and the other group would speak against science. And this worked really well with my undergrads. So they were really enthusiastic about it, and they organized themselves in the groups, and they really got into character, and they used to fight each other and scream and shout, and well, they were undergrads. So it was a lot of fun. But when I started teaching my grad students at Columbia, I realized that it was a much smaller classroom with fewer students. These were grad students, and they didn't feel very comfortable in the denialist role. They didn't really want to be the science denier in the room, even if it was a mock debate and a fun activity. And then last year, I decided to try a different way. So I invited a guest denier to debate with me. So I would be the science advocate, and I had a guest playing the role of the science denier. And the guest was a science journalist, very experienced, who had written lots of books about science denialism. He is also my husband, so we are used to being in a confrontational situation. It was kind of comfortable for us. So, and then, but the students didn't know it. So we let them know after the debate. We had this activity in class, and during the course, they are exposed to all kinds of knowledge about how thinking, different types of thinking influence decision making that can lead to bad decisions in policy making. So these are not science students. They usually don't come from scientific backgrounds. This is a policy school, an international relations and policy affairs school. These students, they are grad students, they work during the day, some of them are very experienced in policy, some come from government departments, so they know about policy. And what they learn with me in the course is how science influences choice, how scientific knowledge, what we know and what we don't know, and well, maybe what we think we know is the most dangerous, and how that influences decision-making in policy and how that can lead to bad policy decisions. So they are exposed to a lot of the things that I'm sure all your psychology students are familiar with. These students aren't. So I talk to them about logical fallacies and cognitive biases and rhetoric techniques. And the goal of the activity was that they were going to use what we discussed in class, and they would have to analyze the debate and write a report. They had to spot all the logical fallacies and biases and rhetorical techniques that we used, both me and the denier, my husband. So because I'm human, I make mistakes too. Some of the mistakes of the debate I actually did on purpose, but some I didn't, and they caught it. So it was great. And then they had to write a report about their impressions of the debate. And most important, I wanted them to write a reflection on how useful debates are. These kind of debates about scientific controversial topics, how useful the debates are for the layperson. Do they actually help someone make a decision about a topic that they are not familiar with? And of course, that had all to do with the notion of false equivalence and how you present the data. So they had to write a reflection about that. And then they had to come to a conclusion. Should we have antagonistic debates about scientific issues? Is this the best tool that we can use to help to educate the public? We had 5 minutes to do a first exposition of our arguments. And these are the slides that we used. And then, of course, we had a lot of going back and forth with questions. But I wanted you to have a look at what the slides look like so that you can see the strategies that we use. So I was the science advocate, and these are my slides. So I started talking about the data that we have about how the climate is changing and why we know it's man-made. And I talked just the way I would talk to a completely lay audience. I didn't really go into the data. I just wanted to show that we have scientific data to prove that, to demonstrate that the Earth has been heating up. I mean, it is getting warmer, and we have evidence to show that it is man-made. It is because of human activity. And I showed him, so I showed this graph, and then I wanted to let them know the arguments against climate change and debunk them, or pre-bunk them, if you will, because I knew that the science denier would bring those arguments. So I said, okay, so I'm going to go first, and I'm going to let them aware of the arguments that are coming from the other side. But, well, then I realized I was going against my husband, so yeah, you'll see what happened. But, so these are the arguments that I presented to them. So they said these are the things that you're going to hear about climate change, that it's not caused by human activity, it's natural. So they are not really denying that that global warming is real. They are just saying that it's not man-made. They are going to say that it's not a consensus among scientists. Not everyone agrees that this is happening. They said it can be a good thing because plants and animals adapt to change, and this is normal. This is how evolution works. It can be good for agriculture because, well, plants need CO2, so what's the harm? And anyway, it's too late to do anything about it. We're just screwed. So these are the common arguments that I wanted to present to them. And then, of course, I went on by debunking one by one. So I presented the scientific data and say, okay, so it's not caused by human activity, it's natural. And then I presented the data to debunk that. I don't want you guys to go into all of that because you know it. I don't have to show it to you. I just wanted to show you my strategy. So I debunked the arguments one by one. So it's not caused by humans, it's not consensus. I explain what a consensus is. I explain there is a very vocal minority of scientists who disagree. And then plants and animals adapt. And they say, okay, but we might not. So the planet is not going to die because of climate change. The planet will adapt. But what about us as a species? How are we going to adapt? So it's good for agriculture. I said, well, plants do need CO2, but they are going to suffer from the heat as well, and from droughts, and from floods, and all the effects of climate change. And then I explained that the thing that we call doomism, it's too late to do anything about it. I said this is a very common argument used by climate deniers, that because it's too late to do anything about it, there's nothing we can do, so let's just sit and wait for the worst, or maybe nothing happens. And then I was okay, so this was me. And then the denier came in. And as I said, he's a very experienced denier, so this was his slides. And he started by explaining to the students that it's okay to have reasonable doubts, because science is about changing your mind before evidence. And we should be able to question. And if you're not able to question your own beliefs, you're not a real scientist. So he started by pointing that out, and I was like, son of a bitch, but okay. And then he went on to show graphics of correlation, to say that correlation is not causation. And my students had studied that with me. I mean, I have one lesson just about correlation and causation, and then this guy comes out of nowhere, and or my home, and he says that, oh, you know, what she is showing you is just correlation. And he showed them this graph and said, oh, this is correlation, and this is correlation, and it's the same thing. So you can't really say that you know the cause, because all you have is correlational data. And I could see the faces of my students, because they know that climate change is real. They all agree. There was no one in the classroom who had any doubts about climate change. But I could see the look on their faces. Okay, how is she going to respond to that? Because, and this was the point of the exercise, for them to experience how difficult it is. Because deniers are not, I made a lot of mistakes. I actually called Carlos, my husband, a science denier, and he caught me right on the spot. He said, I resent that. This is disrespectful. You don't seem like a person who is open to a debate. It was a lot of fun, but these things happen in real life because we're human and we lose our patience too. And it's very difficult to be on the spot, on stage, talking to someone that brings this kind of information to the public, and you know the harm that this can do. And then he presented all sorts of graphs and figures about how global temperature has been rising for ages, so it's not related to human activity. And then he used this, remember this graph, because I'm going to go back to this one later. So he used this graph to show to the students how the variation is like constant, and we don't see a peak, and there's nothing to worry about. And then he referred me to the fallacy of the single cause, which is obviously a fallacy that I had studied with my students. And he said, oh, what she's doing is the fallacy of the single cause. She's saying that because there is global warming, the only explanation possible is human activity. And this is a logical fallacy. And I was like, okay. Then he went on to say that we can think of a lot of different causes for global warming, and he uses some things that the students knew that were false, like urban heat islands. There was one of my students was actually in city planning, so he knew that. So then the students started to see, okay, so now I think we're going to get him. He's going to make some mistakes. So that was nice too. And then I think this was his best slide, that he said the human cost of the climate panic. And he made it sound like all this climate panic would cause poverty, would cause unemployment, would cause inequalities in the world. And he made a very strong point about it, that that the climate panic was going to ruin the economy, especially of very poor countries, developing countries, while the rich countries didn't care. So he made it about inequalities in the world and social justice. Oh yeah, the guy is brilliant. I'm married to him, I know. Next time I'll get a different denier to come. But so what happened, and that was the most interesting part, was how the students reacted to the debate, because they had an assignment. They had to write a report about their impressions of the debate, and they had to spot the logical fallacies, and they had to answer that question: is the debate useful or not? And then, so this is some highlights of some of my students' analysis. So you can see here that I highlighted that one of my students says that Carlos leveraged many biases and fallacies, appeal to nature, conspiracy theories, and then he got this, a nefarious plot from developed countries to keep the global south from developing. So they all got that, how strong this argument was and how it could really resonate with a lot of people. That they say that he stayed immune to evidence when I presented him with the data. That happens at home too. And so they really did a very thorough analysis of the debate. Here you can see that they caught that he was using a lot of emotional appeal and adversarial framing. This student actually reflected on the validity of the debate, and the student said that, well, for those who are undecided, debates can serve as a tool to sway opinions, depending on the effectiveness of the arguments presented. And the student really enjoyed the exercise. That, well, it's very, very valuable to understand the dynamics of public discourse on controversial scientific issues. These students, they are probably going into policy if they're not already there. So it's very important for them to understand what we mean by scientific consensus when they have to give scientific advice to a policymaker or a governor or the president of the United States, and how they're going to frame it in a way that people really understand it, knowing that people are going to be exposed to very good arguments that are not based on scientific data, but they are very good arguments, and they can be presented in a very powerful way, just like Carlos did. This student made a very interesting analysis that the general public would have a much harder time aligning themselves with my views, with the scientific views, because I was all based on data, and Carlos was all based on emotion and social justice and how we're making a big deal out of something that can really harm very poor people. He said that Carlos's arguments were simple and were grounded in common sense, so they could resonate better with a lay audience. He caught the argument about the poor countries, and he concluded that it's very easy to lie and hard to be right. And if this had been a real debate, the student said he could really imagine Carlos's popularity rising in the polls the morning after, even as scientific councils decried his arguments and signed letters of support. to Professor Pasternak too. So I think this student really got it. I mean, he said it hardly matters if you're right. And it's very, very difficult to speak up for science, even if you have the support of the scientific community. So I could be getting all sorts of letters of support. It wouldn't help sway the public. It wouldn't help me win the argument, at least not in this debate. Then some of my other students, they picked a lot of fallacies. So this student here said, okay, Carlos did a lot of cherry picking and moving goalposts. These were all logical fallacies that we studied. There was evidence of straw man, oversimplifying my arguments, the logical fallacy about the single cause, they caught it. And so they made a lot of very interesting analysis. They said that, and this was interesting. So one of my students, and they caught my mistakes too. And one of my students said, well, both presenters ended their arguments with the slippery slope fallacy, because I made the argument that if nothing is done about climate change, humans will be the ones to suffer, because we will have an increase in droughts and floods and pandemics and production loss in agriculture. And the student said, okay, even if it is science-based, you're still trying to scare people. And I said, well, yeah, I did it. And this one was not on purpose. I did a lot of like silly mistakes on purpose because I wanted them to catch it. This one was not on purpose. I really believed in what I was saying. And then I said, ooh, okay, this works for me too. I learned a lot. And then, of course, I think this sums it up nicely, that the debate highlights how difficult it is to counter misinformation, and the debate also risks making misinformation seem more credible, because we are inviting the science denier in a false equivalence environment, and we're giving him, in that case, just the same credit to be on the stage with me. I am a scientist, he was not, and he was making scientific arguments. So it was really, really interesting. And remember the portion of the graph that I told you. Remember this graph that showed like it looked like nothing was really changing? So one of the students actually caught that this was part of a bigger graph that Carlos had really cherry-picked. He cut part of the graph to make it look like the weather wasn't changing, but if you had the bigger graph, the original one, you would see that it was part of a trend going up. And one of the students actually picked that. So it was really, really interesting. I think it was a super fun exercise to do with them. They had a lot of fun. We learned a lot together, and I was really impressed with their reports, how they really got into the exercise, and they were excited about it. They were happy that they were able to see the logical fallacies and the biases and the rhetorical techniques that we use, and they realized how powerful this was, and how sometimes how powerless the facts are. And that was the whole point of the exercise. And so one student said that the debate really showed how hard it is to speak up for science, even when the evidence is on your side. And it's about balancing logic and emotion when discussing complex topics like climate change. So I really encourage, I know that everyone here is a professor, so I really encourage you to do the mock debate in the classroom. It's fun, it's engaging, the students love it, and we all learn a lot from this exercise. The results, I think, well, for me, they were very, very encouraging. They were very good. The students were able to identify the fallacies and biases. They realized how difficult the exercise was. They were really, really impressed at the denier's skills. One of my students, she didn't write it in her report, but she came to me at the end of the class, and she had this very scared look on her face. And she said to me, "Professor, you know what frightens me is that I know that climate change is real, and I know that it's caused by human activity, and you don't have to prove it to me, but he almost convinced me." And she realized how powerful it is and how prepared these people can be. So sometimes we look at science deniers and we call them science deniers in a derogative way, as we may be thinking that, these people they are probably stupid. They don't really understand the science, or they don't have the background, they don't have the skills to understand the facts or statistics or probability, and it's just not true. These people are really capable people, and they can be excellent in any other field. And treating them as if they were stupid is not just wrong, it's an assumption that can harm us, because we will not be prepared for people who are very good at speaking against scientific facts, because maybe they really believe that. And they are going to stand up for what they believe. So this is what we're up against. And the students, they had this experience firsthand when they saw it happen. They saw it happen right before their eyes, and they saw that their own professor was having a hard time. So I think that was a great experience. So they caught my mistakes. But in the end, I think the most important is that it works as a class activity. It was a lot of fun, and it was really inspirational for the students to reflect on the false equivalence debates that they see all the time, not only in science, sometimes in politics too, and how useful these debates really are to educate people, or if they are just like once a stage for clicks and shares and get more audience. So I think this was a great exercise in the end, and if we have time, I can take questions. No?
We have a few minutes.
Okay, good.
Maybe 7 or 8 minutes, so just shoot away, Dr. Pasternak.
Yes?
How do you keep yourself from being depressed?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I box, so that helps. And sometimes I just, when I go to the gym every morning, and then I meet my trainer, and I say to him, usually when he asks me, "Oh, how are you feeling today?" So the usual answer is like, I want to punch someone in the face, and he says, "Okay, punch me." So that works for me. But no, I think, and I get your point. I think it is frustrating, especially for people who have been doing it for a long time. What really keeps me going are the students. I think it's much more about the students, and when you see the feedback, and when you have students coming back to you with feedback like I had from a student some years ago after she took my class, and she said, "I feel so much smarter now, like no one can fool me." and she was so happy about it. And a lot of my students gave me amazing feedback on how the course was life-changing for them, the things that they learned, because these are not science majors, these are not students that come with a scientific background. So for a psychology major, having one class about cognitive biases is, well, like every day. But for someone who comes from the political sciences or social sciences or engineering, it can be a game changer, and they suddenly realize, whoa, I have a lot of biases. I had one student that was so funny. She was from Greece, and we had a class on genetically modified food. So I explained that everything that we eat is genetically modified, it just depends on the techniques, and I gave this whole class about genetic modification. I'm a biologist, and I work with genetic modification in bacteria, so this is my field. I'm really comfortable explaining these things, and I talked about organic agriculture as well. And then in the end of the class, she looks at me and says, "Oh my God, I have European bias." Because in Europe, these things are so heavily regulated, and she was born in Greece. So she said, "I always buy organic. I was afraid of GMOs all my life, and now I realize, well, there's nothing to be afraid of. It's just a different technique." So the effect that we can have on the students is unique. And I think this is why I think that this conference is so important, because we can make a difference as professors that we can't as public speakers. It's a different role. I do both. I write books, I speak in public. I think we need to be everywhere. But the difference we make as professors, I think, is much more impactful. The impact that we have on these students is that they will become replicators. They will also start to debunk and to talk to their friends and to their family members, and so we create a wave of critical thinking with these students, and they're going to take this for life. So this is what keeps me going and keeps me from getting depressed when I see that especially when I realize that I'm Brazilian. So I moved here. I moved to the U.S. during Bolsonaro's government, and then I said, "Whoa, So finally I got rid of a denialist president. Yeah. So yes?
Do you think that the outcome would be any different if you played the role as the denier, since like your students already see you do a lot of like scientific, work? What if you portrayed like the other side, still showing very valid, like well, not valid, like strong arguments? Would it be maybe more impactful or maybe less? Like, what do you think of those?
I never thought of that, but maybe I'll do that next year, and then I'll let you know. But really, my husband is a science journalist. He is very experienced with science. He really understands science, and I think it wouldn't make any difference with the technical stuff. I think he knows just as much as I do about the general stuff. I'm not a climate scientist, so I was not really in my field in that debate. I actually had to study, I had to prepare, because I'm a microbiologist, and there's lots of things about climate that I didn't know. So I think we were quite in the same situation regarding scientific knowledge about the topic. Maybe he even knew more than me. But I would like to play the opposite role and see how it goes. Yeah.
Do you have an opinion about undergrad students? I know you started with them, but I tend to think not to allow them to have a debate structure as a way of learning. Do you think, what do you think of the risks, I guess, of undergrads?
I think you just have to make it very clear that this is a class activity, this is an exercise. So when I did it with undergrads, they loved it. They loved it. Of course, they loved the fun part about it, but I'm sure that they learned a lot from the experience too. So my favorite year was, I always let them pick the topic. So one year they picked embryonic stem cells. And this was at the biomedical school. So it was undergrads in biomedical school, and they wanted to, it was in a time where this was still seen as controversial, especially in Brazil. We were passing legislation about that, and so they picked the topic, embryonic stem cells. And they came prepared. So I divided them into groups. They had representatives that were going to go on stage to do the debate, and the anti-science group, they were super funny. They came up, they were really in character. They had T-shirts made saying that stem cell research is killing babies, and they had signs. So when the other group was talking, they would hold up the signs saying baby killers. And so I think they loved it, and they had to study. They had to prepare. So I think that was the best part of it. They had fun, but they really had to study a lot about embryonic stem cell research so that they could be prepared for the debate. My grad students, I don't know why I didn't work with them. I tried the first year, it didn't go very well. I noticed that they were not comfortable in the position of the denier. And then the second year, when the situation repeated itself, I said, okay, I'm going to do it different. So last year was the first time that I tried the mock debate with them as an audience instead of participating, and I think it was much better, at least for the grad students. But the undergrads loved it. They understand that it's an exercise, and they don't take it personally. They really take it like as a theatrical thing. And well, I'm all up for having fun in the classroom, so.
Thank you, Dr. Pasternak.
Thank you.